Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Injustice Podcast. I'm your host, David Greenwald. For the past 10 years, we have operated Vanguard court watches in California, including San Francisco, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. Our goal? Expose everyday court injustices, and now, more broadly, shine a spotlight on injustices in the entire criminal justice system, in the form of wrongful convictions, police and prosecutorial misconduct, and mass incarceration. This podcast hopes to take it a step further and highlight criminal justice reform on a national level.
Everyday injustice.
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have MaxwellSzabo from a consultant. How you doing these days?
I'm well, David. Thanks for having me.
So what are you up to right now?
Lots of fun projects and people that we have the opportunity to work with. But I think most of all, it's just an interesting time to be an observer of this work and what's happening across the state of California and the rest of the country.
So I kind of wanted you to start by talking about some of your previous work with George Gascón in San Francisco, and kind of curious as to your impression of Gascón in San Francisco versus Gascón in LA.
Sure. So I started working with DA Gascón in San Francisco in 2013. And before that, I had actually, when he was chief of police, we actually met when then Mayor Gavin Newsom asked him to be the face of a controversial ballot measure in San Francisco, I think back in around 2010. I was kind of running that campaign, and that's how we initially hooked up. And then a few years later, he asked me to come and work for him when he was district attorney in San Francisco. While I was working for him, I went back to school and got my law degree. And over time, I was promoted and ultimately left after he swore me in as an assistant DA, but I never really practiced in the courtroom. But I managed communications and legislative affairs for the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. And it was a really interesting time to be there. A lot of people sort of saw him and his time in the office there as his being sort of the godfather of progressive prosecution. He was certainly one of the first prosecutors to, really begin to use data in a way to approach modern prosecution tactics and strategies, which, might demonstrate more leniency instead of, the traditional efforts to throw the book at folks, but certainly in a way that yielded a lot of positive results. When he left office, violent crime in San Francisco had reached levels not seen in something like over 50 or 60 years. So what he did there was really working. And a lot of the initiatives that I had the opportunity to sort of work on with him continue to be duplicated across the state. And you're seeing more conservative prosecutors, like Jeff Reisig, even in Yolo County, implement programs, that he initiated in San Francisco, for example, around race-blind charging and other efforts. So it was a really exciting time. We kind of were pioneering a lot of the playbook that you're seeing, not only progressive prosecutors, but other DAs execute elsewhere. And I learned a lot and had the opportunity to learn quite a bit from him at the time.
So what's your perception of Gascón in LA? Has he changed, or is he kind of the same person as he was?
I would say it's a bit of both. I think, like any good leader, and I think he's the first person to say this, he is somebody who evolves as he learns new things and as he as his experience grows, and he's had, almost half a century of experience in law enforcement at this time. So in that respect, I think he's evolving and changing. On the other hand, he's very much still the same person he's always been. He's incredibly principled, right? And principled to a fault in some respects, right? He, implemented those policies, the blanket policies, out of, a place of firm belief that enhancements, for example, do not enhance safety. They are simply a product of, the 1990s and early 2000s, where we were lengthening sentences largely for to check the political box that prosecutors were, and elected officials were implementing this whole new regime of enhancements to score political points, not because of any data or science that suggested that it actually increased safety in our communities. And I like to say that when you make policy based on the extremes, you make bad policy. And what I think George Gascón was doing was making policy based on the norm. And I think he caught a lot of flack, frankly, for doing that in a manner that, simultaneously didn't account for the most extreme cases, right? When you make policy based on the norm and what's happening in courtrooms on a daily basis, but you're not accounting for the most extraordinary, rare outlier cases, a lot of his administration and what he's done has been defined by many in the media around those very, very rare outlier cases, instead of, frankly, what's happening on a daily basis. So I think he's the same but different, I guess, if that's my answer. Simultaneously, I think it's a different office than San Francisco as well. Fundamentally, it's a civil service position office. So individuals who are prosecutors there are not subject to being dismissed at the will of the district attorney, right? They have civil service protections. And, when you have a union that has fought him, since the time that he announced his candidacy for office, I was with him the day that he announced his run for district attorney in Los Angeles County. I was with him. One of our first meetings was with the Los Angeles Deputy District Attorneys Association. And it was hostile from day one. They were always hostile towards him. And I remember when we did a meeting right after he was, between when he was elected and his inauguration in 2020, and it was hostile still then, right? So they have never really given him a chance or an opportunity to succeed. They have fought him at every corner, and they have civil service protections from which to do so. And I think he, as an administrator, had to make a decision at the time that he took office as to whether he was going to, heed the call of the voters and the mandate that he was given when he was elected, or if he was going to kowtow to the Deputy District Attorneys Association. I think we all know where he came down on that decision. At least the union is not happy with him for, going with what the voters have overwhelmingly said they want, which is reform. That has certainly made it more of a challenge for him. But thus far he's, been able to execute, a reform-minded vision for Los Angeles County, which was, a long time coming.
Fox News in LA from early July, and they were asking you about the recall and all the signatures, and of course now we know that they blundered terribly and failed to qualify it. What's your kind of take on all of that now?
Well, more interesting than ever, especially I think in light of some recent red state reporting, but I'll circle back to that in a moment. Odd to me that they were able to, I believe in the signatures were due in early July, as I recall. And, in early June, I believe they claimed to have had, the number of signatures not accounting for the extras that you need to get over the threshold to qualify the initiative, which was like 570,000 signatures. But then when they turned the signatures in 3 weeks later or a month later, they showed up with 720,000 signatures. which begs the question, the signatures at the end of a signature gathering campaign are the more difficult signatures to gather, right? You've already gotten the low-hanging fruit. And, so I had real sort of trepidation around the validity of the last round of signature collection that they had executed. How was it possible that they gathered so many signatures in such a short amount of time, given that this was the most difficult period in which, for them to actually gather signatures, and given the rate at which they had gathered signatures previously. So, I was kind of quick to call bogus, for lack of a better term there. And, lo and behold, it turned out to be just that. And frankly, some reporting out of red states suggests that they actually engaged in, widespread fraud, perjury, and otherwise, which is frankly the height of irony. You have a campaign that was launched under the guise of, law and order, that stooped to a level wherein they're engaged in widespread fraud and perjury to attempt to get it over, to attempt to get it on the ballot, which was allegedly witnessed by deputy district attorneys supporting, this vision for law and order, while they're witnessing, potentially thousands of counts of perjury occur right in front of their eyes. So I think it just goes to show what a sham the recall was to begin with. This is not about safety. This is about politics and power. And, recently you've seen, data come out that highlights that, your likelihood of being a victim of homicide was far more likely to occur in more conservative counties across California than it was in the more progressive counties held by, progressive district attorneys. Led one LA Times columnist, whom an admirer of, to point out that the likelihood that you're going to find a progressive district attorney in some of these more conservative counties is akin to finding a mermaid riding a unicorn. And this is sort of the political environment we're living in, where facts continue to be secondary to sort of the reality, and especially given the difficulties that crime reporting, that crime reporters have with sort of contextualizing some of these stories and the issues that we're discussing. It really generates a lot of misplaced fear around reform and reform-minded district attorneys. The reality is that these policies make us safer, and hopefully over time the public is going to really begin to have the opportunity to understand that.
So let's talk about a few of the lower moments of the year, starting with the recall of Boudin. What is your take on that?
It's really sad. Chesa, I think every district attorney has to have, just like every person who comes to this work, has their own approach and their own lens. And, as a public defender, he came to this work with, as somebody who was really hyper-focused on addressing the inequities and the injustices that so often define our criminal justice system. Now, that approach, truthfully, if you look at the numbers, right, actually also benefits our safety. But the manner in which, people perceived him as only focusing on, the injustices and inequities, left them feeling as though he wasn't focusing on people's safety. I think I would dispute that that's actually the case. I know Chesa would too. I certainly believe that he was very much focused on people's safety. It's just, he was talking about these issues in a way which made people feel as though that was a secondary concern for him, even when it wasn't. And, that's unfortunate. I think that he got a bad rap as a result. And that's sort of what the polling shows. People believe, people want to see accountability. And that doesn't necessarily mean longer terms of incarceration. It can mean that somebody engages in a restorative justice process. It can mean that somebody, is diverted, right? It can mean that they're just arrested. And certainly for more, serious offenses and more violent offenses, and or more, repeat offenders, more heightened accountability can be associated with longer terms of incarceration. But, his sort of the language that he was using, I think, led people, inadvertently to believe that he wasn't holding people accountable. And, ultimately, he was recalled despite the fact that during his tenure, crime went down. And I think that really highlights, for me, the difficulty and the complexities of communicating around criminal justice reform. Somebody that, I'm very close to, Jay Jordan, who's now the president of the Alliance for Safety and Justice, once told me that criminal justice reform is 5% policy and 95% message. And I could not agree more with that analysis, because far too often people sour on reform because of perceptions as opposed to reality. And when it comes to elections, perception is reality. And I think that was the problem that Chase ultimately faced in his recent, recall. And, I think it's a shame that he didn't have an opportunity to at least serve his full term and, let people draw conclusions based on that, as opposed to the difficult media environment that we were in coming out of a pandemic when, cases weren't going to trial and what have you. I do think that, he didn't really have the opportunity that he deserved to showcase that his vision was, showcase that his vision could be successful and was successful. And certainly the other problem, I think, is that he was running against himself. In a recall election, San Francisco desperately needs recall reform. He ultimately ended up with more votes. Effectively, more people voted against the recall than actually voted for him in his first, when he actually ran for office the first time. And I think that's really problematic. That, especially in a jurisdiction with ranked choice voting, that you're able to get thrown out of office without running against somebody else. And ultimately, then more people voted to keep him in office than he was initially elected with to begin with. I think really kind of undermines our electoral system here in San Francisco.
Yeah, a lot of strange dynamics. One of the strangest things to me, when we went to San Francisco for the first time in 2019, we covered a trial, and the prosecutor in that trial was Brooke Jenkins. And it was a bad trial. She probably committed prosecutorial misconduct in that trial. She ended up losing the trial. The defendant got acquitted in that trial. Then, of course, she ends up resigning from Boudin's DA's office and joining the recall campaign. We now know that she was getting paid by some entity that was affiliated with the recall, even though she claims that she was working for a nonprofit, which I don't know how all that works. And now she's the DA. What's your take on her so far?
I think at the moment she's experiencing, like any new elected official, a honeymoon period. But I do think that in this climate and in that job, she does not have long to prove, to get results, especially given what we're seeing in San Francisco and where people have come down on both the former district attorney, just 2 years into his first term. Her strongest ally, Mayor Breed, has recently seen her poll numbers take a huge hit as well. I think the idea that she can, skate by is would be a mistake to believe as much, especially given the, implied promises she made as the spokesperson for the recall, right? When you're critical of the incumbent and you say that, what they're doing is creating, a community that is less safe, the implication that has for the voters is that you know better. And now she has the reins, and she is going to be, blamed or heralded for the results on a lot of social issues that frankly fall outside of her purview as district attorney. A lot of the problems in San Francisco ultimately relate to, the fact that there's a very few number of arrests. For example, drug dealing, there's 2 arrests made per day citywide. I don't know what she's going to be able to do about the drug dealing issue in our community if, as the prosecutor, if so few cases are coming to her to begin with. And frankly, if those are cases that are just simple possession for sale, as opposed to cases associated with conspiracy, because the courts are just simply not going to hold those people in custody pre-trial. So she's got a lot of responsibility for a lot of problems that she has limited control and power over, let alone the treatment and services and, mental health issues that are plaguing San Francisco streets. Frankly, that all fall under the mayor's office. She can't really be critical of her ally. So I do believe that she finds herself in a difficult situation. She may ride the honeymoon period out through this next election. But I think time is going to tell what she's going to be able to do about problems that have evaded generations of the most seasoned politicians in San Francisco, California, and even the nation. So I do believe that this is going to be an interesting situation to watch here in San Francisco. And, I do believe that she has set herself up in a position that set herself up on issues that it's going to be very difficult for her to deliver results on.
A lot of people I've talked to were kind of taken aback by Mayor Breed's decision to even appoint Jenkins. And they felt like, and even John Hamasaki, one of the people running against Jenkins, basically said, hey, she had just appointed kind of a moderate that everybody would have kind of taken a deep breath and maybe moved on. Instead, she kind of poured salt in the wound by naming Jenkins in the first place. What's your take on that?
It's hard to say. I think that there were other, from what I've heard about the appointment process, there were certain sort of litmus tests that were required in order for someone to be considered for the appointment. I think specifically, and again, this is somewhat rumor, so I can't say exactly, and I just want to preface that, but I understand that some people were basically, interested in that would have been excellent choices that I don't think would be regarded as either moderate or progressive, but individuals who are now on the bench who had, who used to be the head of the homicide division in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. But I understand that certain litmus tests were required, such as whether or not they would aggressively prosecute drug dealers. Now, there's a difference between holding drug dealers accountable and then just simply aggressively prosecuting them. Because if you don't have the ability, because of other structural issues, such as you're only getting cases which are possession for sale instead of showing conspiracy, and you're not going to have, results given sort of what the bench in San Francisco is doing with those types of cases, you're not engaging in sort of you're engaging in a tough on crime prosecution strategy, but for a public relations purpose, not for the purposes of actually effectuating change on the streets, for our community in San Francisco or otherwise. And I believe that, from my understanding, the other candidates that were actually under strong consideration up until the very end wouldn't commit to, pursuing a strategy that was fated to, that would ultimately fail, that was destined to fail. And I believe that was their downfall and the reason they didn't actually get the pick. Clearly, at least from what we're seeing, if that was in fact the litmus test, DA Jenkins was willing to engage in this strategy, even though we know that it probably won't work. And I don't know if the rationale for making that pick was we need to make people feel safe, even if nothing's going to change on the streets of San Francisco, as opposed to, we need to do the hard work to actually identify the solutions that need to be implemented and executed. And I'm looking for a partner and a district attorney who's going to work with me to make that happen. And if that's the case, I have broader concerns around sort of the decision-making process that occurred there. But I wasn't in the room, and ultimately we are where we are today, and the voters are going to be the ones that have the final say on whether that vision is, that PR vision, alone is going to rule the day, or if we're going to have a shift in direction.
So I did want to talk a little bit about Orange County and Pete Hardin. And, obviously Pete didn't do that well, but maybe surprisingly, because Spitzer has so many problems. At times he really did appear to be unhinged. And, there's at least 10 years going back of scandal in Orange County, which he had gotten elected pledging to clean up some of that, and if anything, he made it worse. So you were involved in Hardin's campaign. What's your take on what went wrong there?
I think the threshold issue that we faced was turnout was extraordinarily low. If you look at it, was older, it was whiter, it was more conservative. I think that this sort of harkens to some of the issues with DA elections in general is, outside of Los Angeles and San Francisco, they occur in off election years where you get a smaller slice of the electorate, which if you do, a June primary election in an off cycle year, you're getting among the smallest and most conservative turnout that you're gonna see. And lower turnout elections trend more conservative. You're gonna trend towards homeowners, you're gonna trend towards people voting with their wallet, right? Versus, a presidential, primary and general election, you're gonna see, more voters, an election that's more reflective of the community itself. Now, it may not have made just based on the numbers, it may not have made a difference. I think it's possible that in a June primary election, if the number of Democrats participating had gone up considerably, it's possible we get into a November general. Pete's odds as a first-time candidate against somebody who'd been running in Orange County for 25 plus years still weren't going to be. It was always going to be a struggle for him, and I just really quickly want to give a huge shout out to him for taking on that challenge, which he always knew was going to be an uphill battle, and for doing it for the right reasons, nonetheless. Now, I do think that first and foremost, Orange County is changing, but it's changing slowly. And, Democrats now outnumber Republicans in registration. There is a registration advantage. But we didn't see that, unfortunately, in that primary election. So I think it's certainly disappointing, but that is a more traditional county. And, Pete was talking about, issues, probably in the most difficult climate for criminal justice reform that we had seen in a while. This was still in the middle of the recall election of George Gascón. There's no separate media market in Orange County, right? So everything that everybody is seeing about criminal justice and prosecutors was related to the controversy surrounding George Gascón. And I think, Todd Spitzer, did effectively, although I hate to admit it, attempted to, and I don't agree with this, but, attempted to hitch him to the controversy surrounding George Gascón. And, again, there's no separation. It's not as though we're in the San Diego media market, which is not covering Los Angeles. Orange County gets its news from all the Los Angeles TV stations. And that associate, and certainly with much less of the actual coverage about the local races and the local shenanigans that were going on in that DA's office. We saw some incredible scandals that were national news come out of that office that didn't even register a blip. And that is so frightening and problematic. I mean, this is somebody that made, explicitly racist statements in the context of deciding whether or not somebody should be put to death, and, talking about the race of the defendant's girlfriends, right, which is highly illegal. And, not only has implications for that case, but frankly, for every case involving a person of color that goes to that office going forward. And you're already seeing this. You're seeing defense attorneys file motions, questioning, whether or not there's racism in the types of decisions being made by that prosecutor's office. And that's just going to hang over as a cloud over him and over that office until he's cleaned out. So, look, I'm definitely disappointed that we didn't fare better. I'm sure there's things that I could have done better, as an advisor to him, and certainly things that our campaign could have done better. He worked so hard and raised a ton of money. And, ultimately that's really disappointing, the result there. But you know what, we'll continue to fight to, help to install reformers and folks that are going to be, making change. And, whether it's in Orange County or elsewhere, that's disappointing as that was, we're not giving up.
And then finally, talk a little bit about your work with the Prosecutors Alliance and how that organization is probably shifting a little bit at this point in time.
Yeah. Look, first off, so the Prosecutors Alliance, for those who are not familiar, is an association of reform-minded prosecutors across California. As a group, it's a diverse group of prosecutors, right? With their own personal experiences. I think what's really interesting is how, the very unique path that each of the sort of founding members of the organization kind of came to this work. Former judge, former line DA, former police officer, former public defender. And so to see those different, kind of individuals come together, I think really sort of speaks to the appeal of criminal justice reform and for, practitioners that are working in this space. And so, in terms of their trajectory, I'm not really too concerned, right? We continue to see reformers elected across the state. Almost certainly Attorney General Rob Bonta is going to be elected as, to a full term as Attorney General. We'll see what happens in Alameda. We'll see what happens in San Francisco in the long term as well. I'm confident that their membership will grow. I think as an organization, we are certainly shifting our focus, a little bit in terms of, how we operate. I think, we want this to be more staff driven. Unfortunately, criminal justice reform is just so politicized that focusing and centering, everything that the members do kind of takes away from, the work in a lot of respect, because people attack it as being political as opposed to let's talk about the policy and what we're actually doing. So I think we're going to be focusing much more on the policy and a lot of state legislation. Certainly we're going to continue to defend and support reformers across the state. But I think it's going to be an exciting time just in terms of all of the amazing sort of policy efforts that we're going to be pushing forward. And communicating about those, right? That continues to be a real challenge. It's just, how we talk about reform in a way that, makes people understand that this is something that makes us safer, not just correcting sort of the racial injustices that, have come to plague and define the criminal justice system.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on here and sharing some of the stuff going on here.
Hey, my pleasure. We got a lot of other stuff we're working on too. We're very fortunate to support reform and reformers and policies and causes and, law enforcement officials that are looking to make a change in their community. And, just thank you for having us, and we'll stay tuned and look forward to working with you in the future.
MaxwellSzabo, this has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.